Good evening. Glad I came out for Link Larkin. I'm Ari Shane White. I'm the Assistant Director at the Temple Emanu-El Streicker Cultural Center, and I'm excited to welcome you all to hear the cast and creative crew for Broadway's upcoming production of Parade, which explores the themes of anti-Semitism, racism, civil rights, and social justice that are all as relevant today as they were a century ago. Among its many missions, to foster laughter, to educate, to promote discussion, to build community, the Streicker Center is also proud to remind us of what we have accomplished and to fill in the gaps of a history not many of us know or remember. That is certainly true of the lynching of factory worker Leo Frank in Georgia on August 17, 1915, the subject of Jason Robert Brown and Alfred Uhry's 1998 Tony-winning musical Parade, which was reprised last year at New York City Center and just recently announced its move to Broadway. You all heard that already. Okay. The Streicker Center is going to see a performance of the show on Sunday, April 9th, and there are a limited amount of tickets still available on our website. At the end of this discussion, we will have a few audience questions, but if you please join me in watching a short clip of the production now.
This means? It means cancel all your parties. Forget your big parade. It means the crowds will not be cheering, so despite what you've been hearing, you can lay down your spade. It means my mother can stop crying. My rabbi's eulogy can wait. It means that Dorsey can stop beaming and my cousin can stop dreaming of his portion of my estate. It means no, this isn't over. Hell, it's just begun. Hail the resurrection of the South's least favorite son. It means I made a vow for better. Two is better than one. It means the journey ahead might get shorter. I might reach the end of my rope, but suddenly loud as a mortar, there is hope. Finally, yes, Leo, there is hope. This isn't over. We are finally on the other side. Million things that you and I can do. I will speak for doesn't have to walk the plank. It means the gallows still are vacant, and we've got my wife to thank. It means you shouldn't underestimate Lucille and Leo Frank, 'cause this is not over yet.
Here to provide us with a much-needed history lesson and to talk about Parade, we are proud to welcome Tony, Grammy, and Emmy Award winner Ben Platt, rising star Micaela Diamond, Pulitzer and Tony Award-winning playwright Alfred Uhry, and visionary director Michael Arden for a conversation with Sirius XM's Jessica Shaw.
Welcome, everyone, and welcome to the thousands of people who are tuning in online from all over the world, and welcome to this extraordinary panel. Alfred, I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Parade is a story about anti-Semitism, about bigotry, about the dangers of groupthink, about what happens when we stand by injustice, and it's also a love story. And I'm curious, when you first sat down to write, what was it in particular about this story that you wanted to explore?
I grew up haunted by this story because my mother's uncle owned the factory where the little girl was murdered. And my grandmother and her sisters and husbands were social friends of Leo and Lucille Frank. And but when I was a little boy, I wasn't born until 20-something years after this all happened. But if the name Leo Frank would come up in conversation, people would get up and walk out of the room. And I thought, well, wait. I was a very nosy little boy, and I thought, why? And my mother said what she always said, never mind. So I, when I got old enough to take the bus to the library, I went to the library and read about the Frank case and asked my grandmother who lived with us, is this all true? She said, well, yeah. And I think the worst thing for that family of German Jews was that Leo Frank was one of them. But to everybody in the South with this case, he was just one more Jew, one is just like the next. And it was a very frightening thing. And I'm still a little bit frightened of it now, the way it mushroomed and got so out of control. And you're right, it is a love story, and it's a story about hate, and almost everybody in it, black, white, Jew, Christian, is a victim. And I can't make any pronouncements about it. All I did was tell the story, and it would just lay there on the page if it weren't for them, so I feel pretty lucky.
Michael, I always feel like a show finds its way to the stage at the right time, and it does, in many ways this show feels disturbingly relevant and contemporary. But I know you guys started working on this revival pre-COVID. I mean, back in 2018? And I'm curious, what was it at that point that put Parade in your mind and made you want to revive this?
Well, it's a great musical, I think, is number one. It had been a show that I had loved for a long time, and the score and the book, and I think it's a rare moment in theater where you're getting to examine something that really happened that also does so, in an incredibly stark way. So I was really interested in, how we could look at true crime and look at the reflection of the underbelly of America through the musical form. Two things that I'm incredibly fascinated by, but that rarely come to meet. So that excited me about working on the piece. And yeah, we did a reading years ago. Now it seems like many years ago, pre-pandemic. And unfortunately, and fortunately, the conversations that we were having now and since then have become so much more complex. And I feel so lucky that we get to be in the rehearsal room, sort of confronting this head on every day as it is just outside our doors and on our doorsteps. So I think it's one of those rare moments when we talk in the theater a lot about how important it is what theater can do and can be, but I don't know if that's always as true as it is now with this show. So I just feel honored to be a vessel so people can hear this story, so that they can come to the theater and do what it is we come to the theater to do, which is to see ourselves reflected back in our beauty and our ugliness, and begin to perhaps go into the world and take different steps.
Ben, I understand you knew the score and you knew the songs and everything to Parade, and you grew up loving musical theater. Did you have any idea the kind of heft of the show when you were a kid, probably like listening to the songs in the car kind of thing?
No, I did not. I knew the song "This Is Not Over Yet," which we just heard before anything. It was on some sort of compilation that my parents would play of like great musical theater songs in our car growing up, and it belies a much lighter. It's very hard to grasp the scope of the show from just that number. It's such a hopeful, kinetic, joyful number. And not to say the show doesn't have hope and joy in it, but it's certainly not all that. And so I think for me, it was like very eye-opening to, as a teenager, come to learn the rest of the story, both as a Jew and hearing about the Leo Frank story, just in terms of the history of it. But like Michael was saying, just as a lover of musical theater, to read the entirety of the score in the book and see what a beautiful piece it is, and how just how it really hadn't gotten the due that it truly deserves in terms of how beautifully crafted it is. And it made me all the more excited to do it once I learned all of the darkness that goes with the lightness.
Micaela, what was your relationship with Parade?
I loved it when I was really young too. Again, and like the score is just so beloved by musical theater artists. And in 1998, when it debuted on Broadway, not that it wasn't received well, but it didn't run very long, and it came to be this kind of cult classic for MT kids, but not necessarily a successful run on Broadway, whatever that means. And there's many factors of why that could be, like what else was playing at the time, like was ragtime too similar, whatever it is. But I do think it's so fun to be able to live in a piece that you've loved for so many years, especially for like revivals are tricky in that way, because why are you reviving it? And I think Michael at the helm of this production has such a clear answer for that, and it's been kind of incredible to be like, we know why we're reviving this. It's like so clear on our stage, and it's different in the most poignant ways, and I'm just lucky to be a part of it. But I loved Carolee Carmello on that soundtrack for a very long time.
The two of you are so unbelievably incredible in this production. Michael, was it like them, that's it, they have it?
Yes. Short answer, yes. Ben is a performer, an artist I've known for quite some time now. We worked together many, many years ago, and Micaela, I met doing the reading of Parade. And I just can't imagine better artists and more beautiful people to be in a room with, delving into, and their love for each other and their work and their craft is palpable on stage. So I feel incredibly lucky to get to be in that room every day.
I want to go back to something you said, and I'm curious to hear from you all when you referenced what the conversations are in the rehearsal room. And Micaela, I think it's so interesting what you said about the show did, when it opened, it won 2 Tonys, for book and for score, right there, Tony winner. That's right. That's right. Well deserved. And critics loved it. And for whatever reason, I mean,
All the critics didn't love it. New York Times hated it.
well, they call this, they call these two, the song that you just heard, a powerhouse for the ages. So,
The New York Times has come around.
turns out they've come around. But it's interesting that it closed after, 6 weeks or something?
It ran, what happened was that it was going to run at Lincoln Center for its prescribed amount of time, which I think was 8 weeks, 10 weeks, something like that. And then a producer was going to move it. But the producer went out of business before the 10 weeks was up, so that was the end of that. But it's been done all over the world, so it's not exactly...
Yeah, it's doing okay now. I did want to ask Michael about what you said about the conversations, what you all talk about in the sense that this does feel relevant. I mean, I walked out of seeing that show and there are so many questions that you're asking yourself and questions about identity and responsibility and pride and I haven't stopped thinking about it. So I'm curious what it's been like for you guys.
I'll just say that, Michael fosters a very, very special atmosphere in his rehearsal room. I think that there's you know, the pendulum has really swung in many different industries and in our world and in our society, and theater is no different in terms of the permutations of conversations we're now having and the room that needs to be held for different sensitivities and experiences. And I think that there are maybe naysayers who say, you know, we've gone too far and there's not room for all those different conversations, and how do you hold space for all these different people with all these different worries and experiences and traumas, et cetera. And the rehearsal room that we get to be a part of is very much living proof that it is possible to hold space for all of those conversations. You know, there's room for every different kind of experience that's being had in that room by Jewish cast members, by non-Jewish cast members, by white cast members who are having to play very difficult characters who are oppressing and who are saying difficult things to other cast members, to our black friends who are in the cast and dealing with going back to a time that was very different for them than for any of us to go back to. And I think that, you know, the fact that we are able to hold space literally, you know, we get to have a conversation at the beginning of each day where everybody can kind of share anything that they want to share, and that's just an emblem of what runs through all areas of our rehearsal, which is just a feeling of total safety and openness and an ability to hold each other first and foremost as people and then as artists. And I think that with a piece like this, where, as you're saying, it's all about questions and gray and nuance, and nothing is kind of laid out for you or delivered for you. It's all about what it sparks in terms of your own conversation. And I think it needs to be handled with this amount of care and sensitivity for it to be sustainable for all of us to do and for it to be effective. And so it makes me very hopeful, looking forward to the future of theater and pieces that are about difficult things that can be dicey or sensitive, because there is a way, I think, and Michael has really shown us that there is a way to handle it with such care and to really take care of each individual and also serve the whole at the same time.
What's it been like for you, Micaela?
Yeah, I mean, I second all of that. I also think it's just interesting to do a piece that kind of has nothing to do with the Holocaust or the Jewish diaspora in that way. It feels like this is such a specific American kind of hatred. And that is complicated. Like, American history has a complicated past, and I think that in order to make this feel like a colored-in piece of musical theater, we've had to really look at ourselves and look at each other in the room. And to be specific, one of my favorite parts of the show and the blocking that Michael has kind of created which wasn't there in the original, is this character, Minnie, who plays my housekeeper. And we have, you know, a complicated relationship throughout the show. And one of the final moments of the show is me and her looking at each other. And yeah, it's Minnie and Lucille looking at, you know, how hard it's been in their lives. And it's also just a Jewish woman and a black woman who are fucked over by the same system. And I think it's kind of a beautiful way to end the piece. And, you know, it's hard to say if we can ever be like, audience, do you see that? Are you understanding what we're trying to tell you? But we do ask ourselves these questions. And I think that kind of represents so many of the conversations we're having of like, how can I see you? How can I make sure you feel held? How can I feel held? You know, it's the only way to move forward, really, I think.
I agree so much that it's so much a story about the American Jewish experience also. And it's interesting, Ben, because Leo is, he's a Yankee, he's from the North, so he feels...
Brooklyn.
Yeah, he's from Brooklyn. So that's right. So he feels, you know, uncomfortable in the South. And Lucille is the opposite. She is a daughter of the South, and she has tremendous pride in that identity. And it's such an interesting juxtaposition of these two people, because of course there is their own identity, and then there is how others perceive them, which is exactly identical.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the more fascinating things about the show, I think, to me. But in the first scene of Parade, he says Meshuggah, and I say, why do you use words like that? Like, why do you have to do that? You know, it's so strange to me to put your Judaism first. And as Alfred has said, Lucille is Southern first, Jewish last, you know? And I think that as the show goes on, and we've been talking about this too in the room, whiteness feels conditional. Even though Lucille really wants to be, to assimilate in that way, by the end of the show, she's white until she's undeniably Jewish. And I think that's an important story to tell right now.
Absolutely. Alfred, you grew up in the South, and as a Jewish person in a Jewish family, did you feel like that gave you this specific ability to tell this story?
Well, as I said, it was a sort of a family story, and I think my family was 4 generations Southern when I was born, and that's a long time ago. But I can't help loving the South and hating it at the same time. I didn't hate it when I was a little boy. I hated anti-Semitism, and that happens a lot. But I love this. I don't know. I guess people love where they grow up, and there are a lot of beautiful things in the South. The literature is beautiful, and there's a lot of things to be proud of. And I just wanted to mix it up. And when Lucille says, toward the end, she says, "I'm a Georgia girl," and I was a Georgia boy. I guess I still am, and I can't explain it.
There's a moment in the show where Mary Fagan, who is the 13-year-old who is killed, and her mother is singing this song about forgiveness, and then she kind of turns to Leo and just says, the Jew or Jew, and it's a moment where it kind of takes your breath away. It reminds me of the moment in Cabaret, of if you could see her, and this moment that you're almost lulled into this. I'm listening to this song, and then you are forced out of it so strongly. Michael, can you talk about that moment?
So yes, this is obviously Parade is based on this true murder of a young girl named Mary Fagan, who was killed at this factory, and her mother, Frances Fagan, sings a song during her testimony in the trial where she talks about her daughter. And the song is called "My Child Will Forgive Me," and it's a beautiful song that Jason wrote, where she sort of gives herself grace for the mistakes she has made as a mother that have led to the loss of her child, and ultimately she finds forgiveness for the people who have hurt her and her child. And it's sort of this sentiment that I think is so universal, that we all strive to have this forgiveness and grace. And then she looks toward Leo, spoiler alert, she looks toward Leo in the courtroom and says, "And so I forgive you, Jew." And it does suck the air out of the room. And I think it's an interesting, dramatic moment in that you're watching characters throughout this entire play behave in reverberation of what they have learned and what they have been taught, which is the reverberation of trauma. And that comes out in the form of hate through these characters. And it's not like they woke up and said, "I want to be hateful today." And I think that's what's complicated about it. And so in this number, you really see a grieving woman. Of course, she's lost her child in such a traumatic way, and you see her try to do and use what she has learned based on reciprocal trauma. And I think what the show is exploring, too, is going further and further back to the trauma suffered by the entire country on account of the Civil War. Sort of when people don't deal with that trauma, it just festers and comes out in the most awful of ways, which we see transpire on the stage.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious what research. I mean, the 1913 when the trial was, it's such a fascinating time. I mean, the Dreyfus Affair was certainly not a distant memory for people. The country was pretty anti-immigration. There was a lot of xenophobia going on. And how much did you research your characters or the time period in order to play these roles?
For me personally, I mean, Steve Oney has an amazing book called The Dead Shall Rise, which is sort of the kind of end-all be-all in terms of a great account of this historically and a very thorough account. So I did read that. But and we have a wonderful dramaturg who has given us a lot of supplementary information about characters, and I find that beyond having a good amount of context for the character, it can become a bit of a hindrance if you go a little bit too far in terms of trying to recount every detail, because this is its own piece, and Alfred has written a really beautiful play within this musical where the characters are very clearly painted, and it's very useful, of course, in terms of our responsibility as Jews telling the story, to know the context of what we're doing. But when it comes to the characterization and becoming this person, I think that the text has to be the first source, the first and foremost source. So for me, I tried to sort of balance having enough context and knowing where he came from and who he might have been like, but really focusing more on my connection to Micaela and to the words on the page.
Yeah, I think that's smart. I kind of did it similarly. We kind of knew we were doing City Center early on last year. And so I spent a lot of the first half of the year delving into the real story and kind of time period. And then once City Center happened, I kind of had to let it all go because, as you said, there's this beautiful line in that book where Lucille is talking about the first time she met Leo, and she says, if there is anything like love at first sight, it was when I saw Leo. And I don't know if that quote holds up with our show. It might, and there may be a way to add that, but I think it was kind of important for me to figure out my Lucille's backstory, so I agree with that. But I do think the more we've gotten into the time period, I think it was important for me to read about Jews during the Civil War, just because that's where my family came from. How far do you go back? And I kind of read a little bit about Jews and blacks at the turn of the 20th century, just to understand where their relations were. But yeah, I think it's all this beautiful painting, and the more you know, the more you color in, but you do kind of have to have the focus somewhere.
And Michael, you chose in the staging you do have pictures of the trial and the jury. I mean, you can see things. Was that a way to sort of marry these two things of we are telling this story about these characters of the show while also contextualizing it?
I wanted the audience to be continuously reminded in this dramatic setting that these people lived, breathed, ate dinner, went to sleep, woke up, that they were as real as you and I are in the audience. And so I also wanted to kind of relieve the cast of trying to do any sort of imitation of someone from a certain time period or of a real life character. So I'm leaning on Brecht a little bit, who is one of my theatrical heroes in terms of he used I'm getting into the weeds here, but he developed a type of theater called the Fremdens effect, which is the alienation effect. And how that sort of manifests in our production is when we meet Ben and Micaela on stage, who we know because we've bought our tickets to see Ben and Micaela in Parade. Buy your tickets to see Ben and Micaela in Parade if you haven't. We see them on stage and we know who they are and we know that they're going to be playing roles. And then we see a photo of Lucille and Leo Frank, and we're just able to say, these are real people. These are real people, and we believe it. We then get on the ride. We're not thinking, are they acting like them? Is that how he really walked? Is that how? So we sort of are allowed room to be an engaged audience and kind of decide for ourselves who these people are based upon the actions that they perform. And so it's sort of in terms of how I think about character, I don't really think like we walk around thinking, oh, my character is this. I pick up the red cup and I drink, and you decide what that means about me. So that's kind of, I like to sort of give the ammunition to the company as much as we can know about the time, so that that's the given circumstance. But ultimately, for us all to have a good time at the theater and to be as emotionally invested and to see ourselves, I think we need to take away rather than add on, if that makes sense. So hopefully, in providing historical photographs and as much information we can cerebrally understand, we get to remove the layers that time has put between now and then.
You were talking, about just how everyone can come to these horrible, bigoted collective opinions. And when I saw the show, a real theme that ran through it was also the responsibility of the onlooker. And you very much include the audience in that. And you made this choice, I don't know if you're going to do this with the Broadway run, but of Leo, incarcerated Leo, is on stage during intermission. And it's such a fascinating moment where, as an audience member, you really have to question, how am I going to respond to this miscarriage of justice, even though it's a play and I bought a ticket? Can I just go eat my milk duds or whatever you're getting? Or do I need to sit here in stillness and acknowledge what's right in front of me, which Lord knows is symbolic of all sorts of atrocities that any one of us, or I will speak for myself, have, sometimes you stand by and you don't act.
Yeah, but Ben staying on stage during the interval is a chance for the audience to have a discourse with themselves, I think. We get to leave the story. We get to leave. Leo does not get to leave his cell. Ben does not get to leave the stage. And yeah, that was just important to me, that we really see how alone this man was for so much of the time, and how the world could go on around him. We're on our cell phones, we look at our phone, and we can literally leave the country with our minds, and yet he is stuck there. So again, it's just about presenting things to the audience, and in the production, you'll see that the idea of witness is really important. So the cast watches most of the show from the stage, and just like the audience. So the idea is that hopefully we are all witnesses, and as opposed to us saying, this is what happened, this is who is innocent, this is who is guilty, we're actually saying, here, you decide, you are the witness, you are the important part of this experience.
What's that time like for you, Ben?
The jury's still out, because I only had the opportunity to have the experience 7 times in City Center. It was very short. But I echo everything that Michael said. For me, it's a way of sort of paying my respect to him, I think. The musical needs to be moving at a clip, because it's a great piece of theater, and it's directed well, and you can feel Hal Prince's fingerprints all over it, and it doesn't dwell too much necessarily on individual components of the story, and allows us to kind of have the whole experience. But Leo did sit in jail for 2 years, and so it just feels like a way of just paying homage to that fact, and not forgetting that fact, that in the midst of all of these larger conversations about what he stands for and the martyr that he is, and the anti-Semitism and racism and the system in America, just remembering for myself that this is a man, this is a guy, a Jewish guy, and he was sitting in there by himself. And there's been a great variation of response from the audience, and some kind of ugly responses, like people yelling at me and asking me to take a picture, and things that are really really upsetting. And so I'm hoping to see more of the best of people. And I think it's a great, as Michael said, just putting it in the hands of our audience to react how they want to.
I want to go back to what Micaela was saying about the American Jewish, how this is such a uniquely American Jewish story. And I think about the idea of, as American Jews, that we have this kind of agreement with ourselves that America is this great place because it's so much better than a lot of the alternatives. But along with that comes, you kind of make a deal with yourself that you're not going to speak up that much, or you're not going to complain or talk about injustices, because that's gonna question the narrative that you've established about this, like, golden Medina, this place where we are safe. And I was curious for all of you, if just on a personal level, if this made you, or if you came to any kind of realizations about yourself as a Jewish person in this country.
We had a kind of community lunch today with a reverend and a rabbi, which was fascinating and beautiful to watch their discourse. But they kind of touched on this, and I was inspired by it all day. But I think that part of it is like just going back all the way. Like, we all came to America. Like, the original sin was taking this land in the first place. And I think if we all were able to really track back that far, we'd all say we were other in some way. We all came from somewhere, And I think reminding ourselves of that fact is helpful in terms of seeing other people. And I think, and I hope that this story, when you leave, you can like look at someone and be like, you are different from me, and I see you, and that's like kind of what love is anyway. So yeah, I guess I've just been pondering that all day, the idea that like we all had parents who came from somewhere very far away, and if we can go back that far, what could we actually discover in each other that's not less than, etc.
I mean, in terms of my own sort of Jewish identity, I think, like, just the undeniability of being Jewish, I think this piece has really hit home for me. I mean, I think, like, there are times at which living in this country makes you want to put a lid on your Judaism and not put it out front. For obvious reasons, but then on top of that, I think on a personal level, there are just other ways in which I identify as a human being that tend to be more relevant to my day-to-day life, say, like the fact that I'm queer and my fiance's man, and the fact that I'm, almost 30, the fact that I'm an actor, the fact, like, there's other things that just are more easily front of mind, and you start to think, oh, well, I don't really go to shul much, and I don't keep kosher, and I don't really believe in the traditional sense of God that we're supposed to believe, so, like, am I really Jewish? It's apples and oranges, like, does it, but at the end of the day, like, you do a 23andMe, you get back, so whatever and so percent Ashkenazi Jew, like that, you can't, you cannot deny your Judaism. And
have you done a 23andMe?
I haven't. It's mostly Ashkenazi Jew, but I just, Judaism exists in this, which is why it's so hard to discuss. Because it exists in this really weird particular lane where, yes, it's a religion, but it's also a bit of an ethnicity, but it's not quite a race, but it's not, it's like this weird own thing. And as I was alluding to, Michael's created such a beautiful space to have really interesting and nuanced particular conversations, and Judaism is one. And I just think that this piece has inspired me to feel like, I can be proud of my Judaism, even if it only comes out in like my delicate stomach and my anxiety, like that, that, is still part of who I am, and that's my family, and that's where I come from, and that there's no such thing as a bad Jew, and that wearing it proudly doesn't necessarily mean wearing a kippah and going to shul. It just means having an open, nuanced conversation about how you feel about being a Jew.
How about you, Michael? Yes, I'm curious how this, doing this play and directing it and living in this, changed how you feel about you being in this space in America.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, I am a visitor to many of the communities in the story. However, I do feel an interesting pull in this, in that I'm from Texas, and I grew up in the South. My entire family is from the South. And just thinking about the ways in which, I have wanted to run away from that. I certainly moved to New York City as soon as I could, and have, tried to get rid of an accent, and anything like that. So I certainly, it's certainly not comparable, and yet it is relatable, I think, in this. But also I look at the story, and I think what we have been really exploring is looking at how white supremacy is inextricably tied to anti-Semitism. That it is all the same. It is a huge link to evil. And thinking about being a child growing up in the South, and queer little kid who used to love dancing around in my front yard, much to my grandparents' chagrin, and having no idea that I was dancing around with the school flag, which happened to be the Confederate flag. Had no idea as a kid. I was just having fun and dancing around, but thinking about how all of the characters in this play have inherited such, again, I'm going to say it again, they have inherited such trauma and such evil, and don't even realize they do. And we're still just at the beginning of a conversation at how we might address that, how we might enter rooms and begin to look at ourselves in the mirror and begin to have conversations with others whose entire lives have been affected by this very thing that hasn't even crossed my mind before. So in that, I sort of am trying to move towards a sense of honesty, and I think that has been something that working on this play has done, to be able to tell that story. I've never told that story before, and I think working on this show has allowed me to do it, to say that, we actually have to delve into the things about ourselves that might not be pretty, so that we can hopefully find common language and begin to unpack and move past it.
That's beautiful. We have some questions from the audience.
I can hear ya.
We can repeat the question as well.
Okay. My question is, how was this process of reviving a character that already existed different from, say, originating a character? Or did you go into this thinking I want to do it like this person? Or were you no, I want to make it kind of my own character? I know that was kind of answered, but I don't know, I just feel as an actor, how was that process different than doing something?
That's a great question. I mean, I think, Micaela can speak for herself. For me, I have never seen the original. I know that there's an archival recording that exists. I've seen the Tony performance, which is wonderful, but I've never watched, Brent Carver's performance. I obviously grew up listening to it. So for me, there wasn't as large a hurdle in terms of getting certain things out of my head or certain preconceived ideals as there would be for Mandy Patinkin and Sunny in the Park, which are something that's just was a little more in my vernacular as a young person in terms of studying the details of it. But certainly in terms of the score, I know Micaela had a similar experience. We grew up listening to their performances and their interpretations over and over again, and so for me it was incredibly such a gift. I mean, it's been such a gift to work with Alfred, and Alfred is so open and communicative and really wants to examine the piece. And but Jason, who isn't here, to have him at City Center, we had him at the reading as well. But to get to attack the score from just the page and just what was written, and then get to interpret from there, and really divest the things that we think are part of the score, but were really just interpretations by two great performers, was a very helpful clearing of the slate. And then once you kind of have a real clear understanding of what the foundation is on the page musically, then you can start to imbue it with your own, personal touch. So for me, blank slating it was very, very helpful. And once I found out I was going to have this opportunity and Michael told me about it, I stopped listening to that recording, which I think was an important thing as well. And it's hard to, because it's very beautiful.
Yeah, similarly, it's a great question. I think slightly shamefully, I'm a bit of a copier as an actor. So in high school, like doing Light in the Piazza, I just like watch endless videos of Victoria Clark because I did play Margaret at 16 years old. So yeah, it's just like, to me, I love, I think part of my like love for actors is to like be them. And I really did love that album, and I definitely came in on first day of City Center rehearsal with some of her phrasing and just like her like large vibrato. And I did have a little bit of a hard time. I mean, Jason was like, you need to stop. He was just like, please just go far away from that and find who this character is in your voice. So that is kind of like a beautiful little challenge to me. But I think by the end of City Center, I was able to find my version of it. And it will continue to be an exploration. I hope to never do it the same any night.
I can assure you your performance is singular.
Oh,
So-
thank you.
Alfred, how is it for you seeing these, having seen all of these different actors embody these characters that you wrote?
Well, these two are pitch perfect, to use those. I mean, they're exactly right for the parts. That doesn't always happen. You can have talented people who just are too old or too this or too that. They are perfect for the parts. And really, all we're trying to do is, as professional theater people, is tell what we all think is virtually a good story, and to present it to you as well as we all can, and you get to think whatever you want. And that's, to me, the aim of the theater, or any art like that. You look at it, you endure it, and you think, oh my God, that's me, or that's what I want to be, or what I don't want to be. But our job is to ask the questions, not to provide the answers.
Yeah.
Hey, first, thank you and congratulations for such a beautiful show. And it was so beautiful as a musical theater, and also just really heartbreaking as the story itself. I was so lucky to be able to catch the City Hall run, and the timing was really interesting, because that was the time like Kanye West was making all those terrible comments, and going to see that show as a Asian American immigrant, I'm feeling like that was almost a statement for me to go see this show, to show my support and to against this terrible thing going on. And how does that feel for the whole team here when you hear this news and also performing, like at the same time? Like, does that change your way of acting, or like any impact to your way of like creating this show? And also, to me, like I remember entering the hall and seeing the huge Confederate flag there. It's so much, like a feeling of pressure and uncomfortable for myself already. How does a team to make the actors, everyone feeling comfortable of acting their role that might be kind of like some role are not good people?
That's a great question, actually. I mean, it's a couple of questions, actually, but but thank you. And just to say, I think, my goal in sort of what interested me in making theater, and I have a feeling it's similar to these people on the stage with me, is that I want to make theater and go to theater in which I see lives that are wildly different than mine, people who look different than me. And by the end of the evening to think, oh, we're the same. And to find the most interesting way of finding our commonality, which is always so much more than what we don't share. We share so much more than we don't share, right? By the simple fact that we all breathe, Let's all breathe. Isn't that nice? And that's all we do at rehearsal, just hours of that. And then thinking about, making a safe space, there are hateful and horrible images used in the show, some of which being flags, which are especially volatile and especially meaningful for a lot of people and triggering for a lot of people. And I had this thought to rehearse instead of using the Confederate flags, because we're staring at mirrors all day, sometimes, and waving these things around, in thinking, okay, well, what is our job actually when the world is coming in with this stuff around us? Back when we were at City Center, it was an incredibly heated moment, as it still is, and thinking, well, what is our job? Are we responding to the moment outside, or are we here to just do our work and tell this story as clearly as possible? And I think the answer kind of has to be personal for each person. But for me, ultimately, I think it's just a reminder to do the work as well as we can.
Exactly.
And I thought, well, the pride these people have in this opening number, like, we need to rehearse with pride flags, and that's what we do. So we rehearse with pride flags every day, because that's how these characters would have felt about these flags. And that is a way to look for the truth in what we're doing and be honest, and yet a way to keep us all safe and having a good time. And the rest, when we swap those flags out, when we take the stage for performance, that's for you. But we have what's for us on stage.
That's incredible. I think that's so amazing.
It's like a gay pride parade every day. It's great.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for telling this particular story. This is a great example of bringing the story off the stage and continuing the conversation beyond the book, beyond the performance. How else do you suggest we continue the conversation, both about anti-Semitism and otherness, and a bunch of other issues in other shows, in other Broadway theaters in New York right now?
That's a good question.
We're all talking about that right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it definitely depends on what side of that conversation you land on. For me, as a Jew, kind of continuing that conversation, I've found that, I have the privilege of being somewhat of a public person, and I think that, I underestimate the power of representation and of openness, and I find that as much as it's important to, as we're all doing with this piece, and we've been doing in the rehearsal room, to dissect the anti-Semitism conversation and to take part in, dialogues about that, panels about that, to speak with religious leaders, speak with, Jewish politicians and things like that. I also just think it's very important, much like it is when you're representing queerness, to represent just a healthy Jewish life filled with joy and normalcy and traditions or lack thereof, and what makes you culturally Jewish, what makes you emotionally Jewish, anxiously Jewish. And I think, I've just found that, engaging people, obviously in these very difficult conversations is important, but also just finding any opportunity that I can, particularly with our non-Jewish counterparts and cast members and friends in the city, to just share stories and experiences about Judaism that aren't rooted in trauma or that aren't deeply entrenched in all of the opposition and oppression that we faced, unfortunately, is just as important. So, as much as I am proud to be, part of this particular story and to be somewhat of a symbol for that side of the conversation, I find that something that me, particularly in this body and with the circumstances that I've been given on this planet, I found that one of the most powerful things I can do is just continue to broadcast the truth of who I am in terms of my own Judaism.
Anyone else have thoughts on?
I think just engaging in conversation. I mean, I'm calling family members who I know will find this a difficult play to watch and saying, hey, I'm directing a play, it's about this, will you come see it? I think any time you can engage in conversation is the step in the right direction. Especially if you can reach across any kind of divide to do so. I think if everyone reaches out and pats the back of someone, and everyone's back has been patted.
Yeah.
As actors who are also Jewish, you guys kind of talked about, with the pride flags, but how do you get through telling such an incredibly traumatic story that doesn't end well, that ends in a really, really sad way? Like, how do you protect yourself when you do that every night?
I think that Ben and I are particularly lucky in this story because we have this kind of underbelly of love to kind of fall onto when it gets heavy. But we have just these like joyful, and we were discovering more joy in these moments today. Thank you for those notes, Michael. But we were having this this joyful song called All the Wasted Time at the end of the show. And what's kind of incredible about the structure of this is that we like plop the audience and ourselves in the middle of a kind of tense marriage, and by the end, fall in love in this beautiful way because of sad, horrible things that happen, and bond over it. And it's kind of incredible to leave the theater every day with that being the kind of memory of it. Like, it's like when children who are in kindergarten, they remember the first moment and the last moment of their day, the first thing their teacher did, and the very last thing they said, and not really anything in the middle. Obviously, we remember all of those things, but it's beautiful to kind of sit in that love at the end. And I think the other thing that gets us through it is just the fact that we are able to tell this story to all of you. Like, I think that really fills the cup in a big way, and that's what theater is. It's like totally a cycle of like we give and then you give to us. And you know, this conversation will fuel me for tomorrow, and then another conversation with just Ben will fuel me for the next day. And yeah, I think that's what storytelling is about, and I feel privileged to be a part of this side.
I think we have time for one more. Hi. First of all, I love your skirt.
Thank you. It's a dress.
Ooh. So I think right now a huge conversation when casting, especially for Jewish shows, is the whiteness of it, and that any white person can play a Jewish person, specifically Ashkenazi, and Jews come in all different shapes and sizes. So picking Ben and Micaela, what was like this? What was that process like of like picking Jewish people to play Jewish people, which is super, super important?
It didn't seem like a question.
That's a little bit like saying a drunk should play a drunk, because an actor can be anything. A good actor can get inside of people. But that said, we all know what it's like to be Jewish, because we are. So, as I said, these two are pitch perfect to play this part, because they're not only beautiful and wonderful, they're Jews, and they get it. I think that that's just luck, because I've had several productions of this with some non-Jews, and they were pretty good. And to my knowledge, I'm trying to think, there was one Jewish Miss Daisy once, but almost never, and I don't know. I think it's, there's a nice word, peshertz, this is it.
Yeah, I mean, was it important to the two of you that you were both Jewish?
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I think every conversation that's being had in terms of casting, everything is very, the theme of the evening is gray and nuanced, and it's not, there's never like a hard and fast rule. Like as Alfred said, actors should be able to play anything that is within their ability and talent to play within reason. I do think you have to take it situationally. That extends to queerness, I believe. Obviously, not when it comes to race. That's a very clear line. But I think when it comes to Judaism, you have to look at the particular moment and the project and the situation. This is a story, obviously it's very intrinsically Jewish, where characters are being oppressed because of their Judaism, where a lot of their characterization comes from their Judaism. And I think in that case, it's obviously incredibly powerful and important to have Jews play those roles. Do I think that every character in every piece that ever has portrayed as Jewish needs to be played by a Jew? Probably not. Hopefully there'd be, if there is intrinsic Judaism to the story, there would be a Jew writing the piece, there would be a Jew directing the piece, there would be some Jewish voice in the room. Similarly to queerness, I don't think every single queer character needs to be played by a queer person, but if it's an intrinsically queer story, there should probably be queer voices in the room. So in this given moment, this show at this time with this team, it seemed pretty important, I think, and kind of unspokenly important in the sense that nobody really batted an eye that it needed to be cast authentically Jewish. And it just was very lucky that it was Micaela, because she's the best.
Phew.
I want to go one step further and say that about it being unspoken, like, it's actually important that we speak about it. And that, I spend a lot of time casting things, so this is a constant conversation in the work that I do as a director and what is my job. And it was clear that first of all, these were the perfect people to play the roles, and the only two people I wanted to play the roles. And but also it was imperative for me, and sort of for knowing that I would be foolish not to. And yet this is, I think, the first production where Jews have played these roles.
Yeah, I will also just add that I think that there's been such incredible conversation around so many other casting decisions, like making sure black people are in black roles, making sure trans people are in trans roles, and I think sometimes Jewish people are left out of that conversation. So I'm happy that our show is saying, no, Jews count here, too,
And how lucky are we that these people get to bring their life experience and the complexity of that and their relationship to their faith and their Judaism and their heritage to this. Like, it's win-win. It's incredible. It only makes the work better, which is what I'm interested in more than anything.
It's yeah. Parade is an extraordinary show. This production is so incredibly special. Starts in previews on Broadway, Feb 21, yeah?
Yeah, in like 2 weeks.
Yep. March 16th,
We gotta go.
Opening night. I want to thank this incredible panel, Michael, Alfred, Micaela, and Ben, and all of you so much, and for your thoughtful questions, and to everyone who's zoomed in, and go see this show. It's really, it stays with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.